Well, welcome what I'm sure will prove to be a very exciting and informative evening. My name is Alex McFarland, and it is a joy to be able to moderate tonight a debate about what has been called the biggest of all questions. Does God exist? The ultimate question. And here tonight to discuss and debate that proposition are two very good presenters that you'll meet in a minute. But before I introduce them and tell a little bit about the format of the debate that we'll experience tonight, I just want to say a word of thanks to the two groups that have worked really hard to bring this evening to you all. I thank all of you for being here. But on behalf of the Atheist, Agnostic, and Skeptic Club, Robert Eldridge, Lindsay Welch, Josh Deaton, and they've got some information in the lobby as well, uncgatheists.com, and also for Ratio Christi, the Campus Christian Apologetics Club, the chapter leader Adam Tucker, Matt Kennedy, the president Jake Phillips. They've got information in the lobby as well for Ratio Christi, but they've worked really hard. They've done a lot of promotion, a lot of logistics. Let's just give them a hand, the two clubs, for putting this together. Now, at the end, there will be question and answer. The mic to my right will be the mic for questions directed at Dr. Richard Howe on my right. The mic on the left for questions directed at Dr. John Shook. And we'll probably reiterate this as we get closer to it, but at the end there will be 30 minutes of Q&A. Each respondent will have 2 minutes to answer the question. And please be thinking about your questions, and so it will truly be in the form of a question and not a treatise, but a question. And also, we ask that in keeping with the academic nature of tonight's presentation, let's all do our part to maintain a respectful tone throughout the evening, and we appreciate that. But from each of the presenters, there will be a 20-minute opening statement. There will be a first rebuttal from each of the presenters in the length of 10 minutes, then a 5-minute second rebuttal, and then a closing statement from each presenter of 5 minutes each. And I want to give you the bios on each of the presenters. Representing the denial, the negative position, that is Dr. John Shook, Director of Education and a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Inquiry, Visiting Assistant Professor of Science Education at the University of Buffalo. And from 2000 to 2006, he was a Professor of Philosophy at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Shook publishes on philosophical topics about science, mind, ethics, democracy, humanism, atheism, and religion. He's debated the existence of God with leading theologians, including William Lane Craig. He's authored and edited more than a dozen books, including Pragmatic Naturalism and Realism, A Companion to Pragmatism, Dictionary of Modern American Philosophers, The Future of Naturalism, and The God Debates, most recently. And you can learn more about his research at shook.pragmatism.org. Dr. Richard Howe earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of Arkansas. He's professor of philosophy and apologetics and director of the PhD program at Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a contributing writer for the Christian Research Journal and has contributed to several apologetics books. He speaks and writes widely on philosophy and Christian apologetics. Most recently, about 1 year ago, Dr. Howe debated skeptic Michael Shermer on the question of God's existence. You may learn more about his work at richardhowe.com. And now with an opening statement in the affirmative, and I'll be keeping time and we'll give time cues to each of the presenters. But now the 20-minute opening statement, please welcome Dr. Richard Howe.
Because of the time constraints that we're working under, particularly the opening statements, I want to read my opening address. And so while it's 20 minutes long, I promise you it will seem like 30. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your presence tonight. I wish to defend the notion that the existence of God is a reasonable inference from the evidence regarding a number of features about reality. By God, I mean a being who is the personal, timeless, immaterial cause of the existence and design of the universe. I believe that the existence of God is a reasonable inference from the evidence of three features of reality. First, the coming into existence of the universe, the current existing of the universe, and the design in the universe. First, the coming into existence of the universe. In philosophy, this is a version of the cosmological argument known as the Kalam cosmological argument. It seeks to demonstrate that the universe came into existence a finite time ago, that is, it must have had a beginning and thus needs a cause to explain its existence. The medieval Islamic jurist, theologian, philosopher, and mystic Al-Ghazali succinctly formulated this argument, and it has been popularized by contemporary Christian philosopher and theologian William Lane Craig in this way. The universe began to exist. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. In defense of the first premise, I think both scientific and philosophical evidence point to the fact that the universe began to exist a finite time ago. For the sake of time, I will unpack only the scientific evidence and leave the details of the philosophical argument having to do with whether the past can actually be infinite temporally, to either any rebuttal time if Dr. Shook brings the subject up, or to the Q&A time if anyone is interested in pursuing it. First line of evidence for the existence of the beginning of the universe. First is the expanding universe. Scientists maintain that every object in the universe is moving away from every other object, such that even space itself is expanding. Physicist George Gamow says, quote, "The entire space of the universe, populated by billions of galaxies, is in a state of rapid expansion with all its members flying away from one another at high speed," unquote. Albert Einstein observed, quote, "Hubble's discovery can therefore be considered to some extent as a confirmation of the theory of the expansion of space," unquote. The significance of this is that if the universe is expanding, it could not have been expanding from all eternity, otherwise it would have been infinitely dispersed, which it is not. Therefore, the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Second is the second law of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics says that all closed systems will tend towards a state of maximum disorder or entropy. In a closed system, the amount of energy available to do work decreases and becomes uniform. This amounts to saying that the universe is running down. Physicist Rudolf Clausius, the formulator of the second law of thermodynamics, stated this way: "We can express the fundamental laws of the universe in the following simple form. 1. The energy of the universe is constant. 2. The entropy of the universe tends towards a maximum," unquote. Agnostic astronomer Robert Jasper observed, quote, "The laws of thermodynamics point to one conclusion, that the universe had a beginning," unquote. The significance of this is that the universe could not have been running down from eternity. Otherwise, it would have run down by now, which it has not. Therefore, the universe had a beginning a finite time ago. Third is the Big Bang theory. Big Bang is the idea that the universe began in a colossal explosion a finite time ago. MIT physicist Victor F. Weisskopf muses, quote, "The origin of the universe can be talked about not only in scientific terms, but also in poetic and spiritual language, an approach that is complementary to the scientific one. Indeed, the Judeo-Christian tradition describes the beginning of the world in a way that is surprisingly similar to the scientific model," unquote. Astrophysicist Christopher Eichen has, I believe, accurately observed, quote, "Perhaps the best argument in favor of the thesis that the Big Bang supports theism is the obvious unease with which it is greeted by some atheist physicists. At times this has led to scientific ideas such as continuous creation or an oscillating universe being advanced with a tenacity which so exceeds their intrinsic worth that one can only suspect the operation of psychological forces lying very much deeper than the usual academic desire for a theorist to support his or her theory," unquote. The significance is that the universe has not existed from eternity, therefore the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Thus we see from the expansion of the universe, the second law of thermodynamics, and the Big Bang theory that the universe began to exist. The second premise of the syllogism says whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. As Dr. Shook claims, quote, "Reason demands that events have causes, since something coming from nothing is just really a mystery, not an explanation," unquote. Everything we know about the universe suggests that the things that make up the universe are caused to exist. Thus, there must be something that caused the universe to exist, which is itself not part of the universe. The conclusion of the syllogism follows necessarily. The universe has a cause of its existence. But since this is the beginning of the physical temporal universe itself, then the cause cannot itself be physical or temporal. Now the question becomes, what caused the universe to come into existence? Dr. Shook, in his lecture, Reasons to be Skeptical Towards Religion, in iterating possible causes suggested by scientists, says that perhaps there is a, quote, "timeless or eternal nature," unquote, beyond the Big Bang. But this is what I am arguing, namely that there is something that is timeless, that lies beyond and is the cause of the Big Bang. I do not see how this being, if it is timeless, can also be physical. Also, Dr. Shook says, quote, supernature may be all that there is because it may be either ultimately timeless or eternal, and hence entirely self-sufficient. There is no need for a God hypothesis if supernature could have those properties. For someone who invades against supernatural throughout his writings and lectures I have read and heard, it is amazing that he is here suggesting that perhaps there is a supernature, since supernature is just a noun form of the adjective supernatural. Further, the fact that this supernature exhibits some of the properties theists would ascribe to God makes me want to say that in offering such an alternative, Dr. Shook is invariably inching towards theism. Atheist philosopher Clinton Smith observed, quote, it belongs analytically to the concept of the cosmological singularity that it is not the effect of prior physical events. This effectively rules out the idea that the singularity is an effect of some prior natural process. I agree with Clinton Smith. It seems that the best way to account for why the universe could have come into existence only a finite time ago is that if the cause of the universe is itself timeless, then its existence would be contemporary with the cause. This is because if the cause of the universe was merely a sufficient condition for the universe, then the effect of the cause would have existed along with the cause. But we've seen that the scientific evidence points to a beginning of the universe. Thus we have a universe caused by something that is not itself a universe, namely something that is non-physical, timeless, supernatural, and personal. I submit that this cause is God. Second, the current existing of the universe. Arguing from the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, even if the universe has always existed, one would still need to posit a cause of its current existing. When we observe things, we notice that there is a distinction between that thing's essence and its existence. Essence is what something is. Existence is whether something is. Take yourself as a human being, for example. What this means is that your essence as a human is distinct from your existence as a being. Your essence is what makes you human. Your existence is what makes you a being. Your essence is what you are. Your existence is whether you are. With this distinction in mind, the argument is this. Whatever is true of you must either be because of your essence or not. For example, the fact that you have risibility, that is, the ability to laugh, is because of your essence. You have risibility by virtue of being a human. Other things are not because of your essence. For example, the fact that you are at UNCG tonight. It's not by virtue of being a human that you are at UNCG. Otherwise, no one outside of UNCG would be human. However, you can explain how it is that you are at UNCG despite the fact that it is accidental to you as a human. You are at UNCG because you caused yourself to be at UNCG. Now consider your own existing. Clearly, you do not exist by virtue of being a human. Existing is not part of your essence. But just as clearly, you cannot be the cause of your own existing. Otherwise, you would have to exist before you exist, which is a contradiction. Therefore, your existing must be caused by something else. But then that thing's existing must either be because of its essence or caused by something else. Now, this series cannot go on to infinity. An illustration may help to show why. If you sought to explain a moving train of boxcars, you would not do to say the reason this boxcar is moving is because the boxcar in front of it is pulling it. For then the question would suggest itself, why is that boxcar moving? Further, there cannot be an infinite number of boxcars because even an infinite number of boxcars is not sufficient to explain why the whole train is moving. Only an engine can account for the motion of the train. But an infinite number of boxcars means there could not be an engine at the start of the train, no motion from the engine, nor any motion throughout the train. Likewise, when it comes to explaining the existence of things whose essences do not account for their existing, it must be because there is something that exists whose essence is its existence. And as Thomas Aquinas observed, all men know this to be God. Third, the design in the universe. In philosophy, this is known as the design or teleological argument. The notion of design can be unpacked along several lines, three of which I want to examine. First, design is fine-tuning and origin of life. Second, design as information. And third, design as knowledge of reality. First, design is fine-tuning in the origin of life. According to philosopher Robin Collins, quote, "When scientists talk about the fine-tuning of the universe, they're generally referring to the extraordinary balancing of the fundamental laws and parameters of physics and the initial conditions of the universe. The result is a universe which has just the right conditions to sustain life. The coincidences are simply too amazing to have been the result of happenstance," unquote. Dr. Shook comments, quote, "The cosmological constant and the force of gravity both determined that slight variations to either of these magnitudes would have prevented the universe from sustaining life," unquote. Astronomer Hugh Ross lists over 35 physical constants or values that are necessary for life. He argues that their simultaneous instantiation seems so antecedently improbable that the appeal to a cosmic mind and fashioner to explain them is more reasonable than attributing their coalescing to mere chance. Physicist and Anglican priest John Polkinghorne argues, quote, "There seems to be a chance of a revised and revived argument from design, appealing to a cosmic planner who has endowed the world with a potentiality and planted within the delicate balance of the laws of nature themselves, which laws science cannot explain because it assumes them as the basis for its explanation of the process. In short, the claim would be that the universe is indeed the carefully calculated construct of its creator," unquote. Now, obviously, Dr. Shook does not think these remarkable characteristics of the universe are evidence for a cosmic designer. How then does he account for them? His treatment is surprising, if not startling. He says, quote, "It is interesting how this fine-tuning argument is based on current scientific knowledge. Unlike religion, however, science constantly revises its theories in light of new evidence. That means that this fine-tuning argument is precariously based on current scientific knowledge of the laws of nature involved at the Big Bang. It could look to us like an incredible coincidence, but you have to wonder about whether cosmology will make new discoveries that erase this coincidence," unquote. Now, in some contexts, this type of reasoning is called the fallacy of argumentum ad futurus, or argument to the future. When the current scientific evidence seems to support his thesis that there is no God, he confidently appeals to and encourages. Hold on, let me catch up with myself here. All right, sorry. He confidently appeals to and encourages us, if not insists, that others do the same. But when the current scientific evidence seems to point in the direction of God, as for example the cosmic designer, then we are warned not to be too confident, since there is no knowing what science might be telling us tomorrow. But with this line of reasoning, I could make almost any claim I want and appeal to a future state of science and wonder how science may someday support my case. Now, some may suggest that the theory of evolution is adequate to account for this apparent design. But is it reasonable to relegate this fine-tuning or the origin of life to evolutionary theory? It is manifest that evolution cannot itself be responsible for the initial fine-tuning conditions of the universe, since the process of evolution presupposes these very conditions. But as an explanation for the origins of life, it fares no better. Biochemist Charles Thaxton, mechanical engineer Walter Bradley, and geochemist Roger L. Olson, in their book The Mystery of Life's Origin, deftly demonstrate the impossibility of the origin of life by chance, where the idea of chance here factors in the known laws of physics and chemistry. They explain, quote, "Without a doubt, the atoms and molecules which comprise living cells individually obey the laws of chemistry and physics. The enigma is the origin of so unlikely an organization of these atoms and molecules, it is apparent that chance should be abandoned as an acceptable model for coding of the macromolecules essential in living systems," unquote. Thus, it seems clear that a reasonable inference from the evidence for the fine-tuning of the universe and the origin of life is a deliberate causal activity of a cosmic designer. I believe that this designer is God. Second, design is information. It is evident that our world exhibits order in complexity. Scientists believe that the known laws of nature can account for the occurrence of certain manifestations of order and complexity. But there's a certain type of order and complexity that known laws and regularities cannot account for. This is information. Scaling a mountain, you observe much complexity but no order in the seemingly random arrangements of rocks and mounds. All this complexity can be explained by the natural effect of gravity and wind and water erosion. At the top of the mountain, you examine a snowflake. A snowflake contains much order but little complexity. You can account for the crystal formation of the snowflake by the behavior of the water as it freezes because of the nature of the water molecule. But you can go to a mountain and see the carvings of Mount Rushmore. The peculiar arrangement of features exhibits a specified complexity or information. The significance of finding information is that uniform experience indicates that information comes from intelligence. You would never be obligated to try to explain the information in Mount Rushmore on the basis of gravity or wind and water erosion. Some scientists insist that there is information in nature. This information is contained in the DNA molecule. Philosopher of science Stephen Meyer observes that nearly the same time that computer scientists were beginning to develop machine languages, molecular biologists were discovering that living cells had been using something akin to a machine code or software all along, unquote. Atheist biologist Richard Dawkins notes there's enough information capacity in a single human cell to store the Encyclopedia Britannica, all 30 volumes of it, 3 or 4 times over, unquote. The application of this data to the design argument is this. Uniform experience tells us that information has its origin in intelligence. Thus, it is reasonable to believe that the information in the DNA came from an intelligence. I submit that God is the intelligent designer of biological life. Next, design is knowledge of reality. My argument here is two-pronged. First, the reliability of our sensory faculties to give us truth about reality makes more sense within theism than atheism. Second, there are a number of features about reality that naturalism seems inadequate to account for, which features become part and parcel of the philosophical case for God, and which make more sense in light of God's existence. Notice Dr. Shook's position on the role of science in our knowledge of reality. Philosophical naturalism undertakes the responsibility for elaborating a comprehensive and coherent worldview based on experience, reason, and science, and for defending science's exclusive right to explore all theories, explore and theorize about all of reality, unquote. Assuming he means by science here the contemporary understanding as dealing only with physical reality, I submit that such a discipline is inadequate to account for either the reliability of our senses or a number of features about reality, the collection of which are the building blocks for the philosophical case for theism. First, how are we to justify that our sensory faculties are adequate to give us truth about reality? Suppose you came upon a sign which reads Greensboro, 100 miles. Further, suppose that you believe that this sign came together by the unguided processes of physical nature. Even if you thought you could account for the information on the sign by such process, why should you think that the forces of nature brought the sign about exactly 100 miles from Greensboro? In other words, why should you think that the sign was telling you the truth? But if our sensory faculties are the product of such unguided forces of nature, why should we think that they give us truth? Survival of the species is not enough, for to survive one would only need consistency, not truth. Second, how can science be the sole instrument about the truth of reality? For if such a discipline has the exclusive right to explore and theorize about all of reality, this will necessarily, by its very method, exclude anything that is not physical. It commits the fallacy known as the selection effect. If you drag a net through the water of a lake in order to gather data about the relative sizes of marine life, invariably any life that is either too small or too large to be caught in the net will not be caught in the net. Thus, the conclusions drawn from the conclusions will be wrong, or from the collections rather, will be wrong, because the data was corrupted by the collection method. Thinking that only science can explore and theorize about reality is to limit one's access to aspects of reality that may themselves not be physical. With this, I ask, how can the methods of science as understood today give us any understanding about the reliability of our senses, as we've already seen, universals such as humanity or justice, laws of logic, uniformity of nature, whereby we can be confident that the physical laws of nature will be tomorrow what they are today, which is the very foundation of inductive logic and the so-called scientific method. Truth as correspondence to reality, moral properties like justice, goodness, honesty, and love, which are so fundamentally different than physical property such as inertia, charge, and spin.
Time.
Thank you.
Now with 20-minute opening statement, Dr. John Shook.
Okay. Well, we've overcome our technical difficulties. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. It's a real pleasure for me to be here in Greensboro. I especially want to thank the organizers for both parties for this fine event, And especially a thank you to my co-debater, Dr. Howe, for coming out tonight. Well, we had quite a spin. I think you heard more words from me up on the screen than you might actually have in this sheet of paper. I have to warn you, however, he repeatedly quotes me out of context from informal talks. He gives lengthy quotes from my books without, of course, providing any follow-up in succeeding paragraphs. If you want to know what I actually have to finally say about these matters, you could, well, you're going to hear him tonight, or you could buy the book. A little shameless plug, right? Now, let's take a look at a basic question. An atheist is often asked, well, what kind of atheist are you? I'm in the middle category. I'm going to defend tonight skeptical atheism. I believe there is no God. And the reason I believe there is no God is because available evidence and the reasoning that can be done based upon that evidence doesn't support any God. Now, I'm going to gladly admit that there's vast mysteries surrounding the light of knowledge. We are a very young species. There's plenty of darkness and mystery. Light has taken us far. Starlight has shown a path all the way back to, as we eloquently heard, the Big Bang, or almost the Big Bang itself. But the light of knowledge, it stops, it flickers, it changes. We constantly learn new things from science all the time. So tonight we're going to hear a lot of things about what science says. Dr. Howe apparently is an admirer of science. We'll see how that holds up. I'm an admirer of science, so both of us will partake freely from what appears to be established scientific knowledge. Warning, however, what is established now, especially about cutting-edge matters, may not be established tomorrow. It is the fallibility and humility of science that you're going to hear stressed from me tonight. No overconfidence, no proofs that no God could possibly exist, no claims that science has or will explain everything. That's for other kinds of atheists that aren't here tonight. Maybe they could be called disprover atheists for a neat little category. But at any rate, my job is to play the role of the skeptic. I'm going to try to tear down the arguments that you're hearing tonight. What are my tools? I already told you I'm going to take for granted what Dr. Howe is taking for granted, current scientific knowledge. But I'm not allowed to assume naturalism. That would beg the question against supernaturalism, right? So I'm just going to use plain old ordinary common sense reasoning. What does that look like? Well, good evidence, ordinary reasoning, established scientific knowledge available to everyone. Both religion and skepticism can appeal to these same common tools. That's, of course, what makes argument possible, counter-argument possible, and debating possible. So let's stand on that common ground. Now, the theologian offers God as an explanation for many things, and we heard God proposed as an explanation for this, an explanation for that. Proposing God is not necessarily a problem. Scientists over the centuries have proposed a wide variety of bizarre-sounding things. It's not the bizarreness or strangeness, it's whether you can back it up with real evidence and show that your explanation actually does any real work. Just having an explanation is not enough. Yes, things need explanations, but we still must expect explanations to be reasonable and supported by evidence before we go ahead and believe them. You are never forced to believe just any possible explanation. Now, what counts as a reasonable explanation? Well, since time immemorial, common sense has said, well, look, a reasonable explanation actually reduces the mystery of the thing that you're trying to learn about. Knowledge is actually increased. Okay? Unreasonable explanations, therefore, just embrace the mystery or increase the mystery or reduplicate the mystery or multiply the mystery. So watch out for unreasonable explanations. We've heard nothing but unreasonable explanations so far tonight, and I'm going to explain why. 6 specific rules. They're going to get a little bit annoying because I'm going to say things like, that violated Rule 2, that violated Route 5. I wish I had leave to hand out this list. We'll just have to sort of remember them as best we can, and I'll give reminders along the way. Rule number 1 is don't multiply mystery. Reject an explanation that just appeals to something beyond understanding. Because if you're trying to explain one thing that's mysterious enough with another mystery that you can't understand either, are you really getting a reasonable explanation? You're not even getting any explanation at all. Second, reject contradiction. Common sense demands it. Logic endorses this. Reject any explanation that ends up requiring you to accept some contradiction, two things that can't possibly be true. Reject begging the question. We've heard that one before, right? Another piece of common sense. Reject any explanation that first requires you to assume the truth of the explanation. You're just going in logical circles. Reject mysterious causes. We've heard a lot about causality. I don't think Dr. Howe is using the word causality the way scientists use causality. The deal with causality is you actually have to have some comprehensible relationship between the two things that are allegedly the cause and the effect. Just labeling something a cause of an effect is not an explanation. It's the absence of an explanation. A reasonable explanation actually shows how these two things, cause and effect, might have some understandable relationship with each other. Science always respects this law. Theology, rarely. Reject arbitrary justification. Getting a little bit complicated, but this one makes sense too. Reject an explanation where the reasons given supporting it could just as equally well support some other rival explanation. You're not really giving a reasonable explanation, even though it sounds good, if you haven't refuted the other explanations that are still sitting out there. Just because you've got one explanation doesn't mean there might be other ones, and you might have accidentally supported the other ones by explaining the reasons for the first one. You've got to rule the others out before you can rule yours in. Finally, we're to unjustified exemption. Reject an explanation that requires all of a sudden a special exemption from a rule that everybody's been taken for granted before. Theology repeatedly violates this rule, and I'm going to give a few examples of why this happens. Now, Dr. Howe did not appeal to Scripture, but it's common for an atheist to complain about the Bible. You've heard atheists complain about this? Yeah, you've heard this, right? We've been complaining about the Bible for a while. Not much good evidence for God. First of all, plenty of religions claim that their holy books somehow came from some God or another, or approved from God. Any religion has got to somehow show why it's special, and usually what happens is any of the reasons one religion gives for why its holy book is the only right one are reasons that could equally well apply to the other ones, everyone who likes their own holy book, and we understand that. But the Bible is a particularly poor source for any reliable information for God, if you think about it. I mean, the oldest Bibles, actually shards and pieces, fragments of this gospel or that letter, aren't any older than about early 3rd century, maybe late 2nd century, right? Many generations after the alleged existence of Jesus. The first complete Bible doesn't show up until the 5th and 6th centuries. Furthermore, there are several complete early Bibles that disagree with each other. There's parts missing, there's parts that don't jive. Was Jesus claiming to be God? Some say yes, some say no. But we know what eventually happened. By about 700 AD, a series of councils of bishops and popes decided what was the final, correct, approved translation. So really, there is no such thing as the Bible. Now, you've heard atheists deny the existence of Jesus before. I deny the existence of the Bible. I mean, the Bible, as if there were one thing that everybody's talking about. Watch the way that the different denominations of Christianity argue endlessly over their Bibles. They can't agree which edition, which translation, if it translates right. They're endlessly changing it. There is no such thing as the Bible. I'm a skeptic. Next, Scriptures look just like what you'd expect from ignorant human beings composing them. There's nothing in the Bible that common folk couldn't have told you 2,000 years ago. There's no real prophecies because anything Jesus allegedly did to fulfill some prophecy, of course, the authors already knew their own testament. Pretty convenient. Ooh, I found this in the Old Testament. Let's make sure Jesus says it. That's all that's going on here. Expecting Scripture to be good evidence for godly or divine miracles violates common sense. This is not eyewitness testimony, folks, that we are dealing with here. I've already described to you the immense chronological time for authors to manufacture these claims. Finally, Dr. Howe didn't bring it up. Sometimes this comes up in discussions of God, that we need God to be moral. That's fine. We can skip this one. I claim scriptural morality is either hopelessly primitive or it simply echoes other civilized codes, of which secular humanism is one. I happen to be an objectivist about morality. I do think that morality is objective, but I'm going to skip this point since my debaters doesn't seem to be relying on it. Now let's get to some real interesting stuff that my debater did talk about. I claim that a God creator, a God allegedly responsible for creating the universe, nature, is nothing but a mystery. And the various arguments that allegedly support this do nothing but violate the basic rules of common sense rationality, so they end up being failures. Now, Dr. Howe made it sound in his presentation very cleverly like this Kalam argument and various other theological arguments had something to do with the Big Bang, had somehow prescient powers to anticipate the Big Bang. I assure you this is not the case. Theology had nothing to do with the Big Bang or the discovery of the Big Bang. Science did the hard empirical work of justifying and discovering the Big Bang. Cosmology has already figured out on solid empirical grounds, not abstruse theological or philosophical grounds, that our universe had a beginning. And the label of that beginning is, of course, the Big Bang. I concede that science agrees that the Big Bang is something requiring explanation. He makes it sound almost as anticipating as if I have to deny this. Interestingly enough, cosmologists are busily formulating some pretty interesting hypotheses about what caused the Big Bang. Interestingly, none of those scientific hypotheses mention God. There is no need for that hypothesis. What is needed is simply more nature. Now, we heard a clever little quip about supernature. I assure you, I believe in nothing supernatural. You're going to hear why. In my book, I more carefully do not use the word supernature. I use the word megaverse and multiverses, just the way cosmologists use them. The idea is not hard to see. The Big Bang had an origin from entirely physical causes according to natural laws that science is already now beginning to comprehend. This is not futurology. This is not Shook making a prophecy about the future. This is not some science wishing and hoping they could figure it out. Folks, they're figuring it out now. Okay? So, these theological arguments, they've got nothing to do with figuring out what caused the Big Bang. As far as science goes, and I'm assuming we're still respecting science up here on this stage, as far as science goes, it looks like there's more nature. Strange nature. Yeah, anything capable of producing the Big Bang is itself going to be pretty odd. Scientists are talking about quantum mechanics. Scientists are talking about maybe our universe was produced by a black hole from another universe. Other cosmologists are thinking about multiverses, other multiple universes that collided to produce our universes. I don't have to stand here on this stage and endorse any of them. I'm skeptical towards all of them. But I'll tell you this, I don't have to prove one of the nature ones in order to prove that no one should take his God seriously. I say be skeptical towards all of them. That's my position, and that's why no one should believe in God. You are not forced to believe in God, because there are, coming online right now, available alternative possibilities. None of them proven, but that's not the game we're playing up here on this stage. My co-debater already agreed to the terms of the debate. All I have to do is knock down his arguments. I don't have to prove what actually caused the Big Bang. All I have to do is show that the arguments that it's a big smiley happy face with a beard wasn't it. All right? It wasn't it. As far as we can tell, as far as the light of science has been taking us, it's just more nature. Weird nature, bizarre nature, hard to understand nature, possibly, in fact, infinite and possibly eternal nature, for all we know. And all I need to do is propose that, lay it on the table. I don't contradict myself. I don't violate any of the rules of reason. However, let's take a look at his creator God. I claim we don't even need this hypothesis, but let's entertain it. Is this explanation really a reasonable explanation? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look. According to this argument, this God has no origin itself. That's convenient. That's why you don't need a lot of gods, right? It's timeless, infinitely old. It doesn't need any more explanation. That's good. Rule 6 is therefore satisfied. But I claim, likewise, it's possible that a timeless or eternal nature may be behind the universe instead of entirely physical causes. By the way, Dr. Howe said that the cause of something physical can't itself be physical. He has no proof of this. It's not a logical axiom of any system of logic I'm aware of. Most philosophers disbelieve it. And that's simply because science has shown that causes that are physical always have physical causes. Okay? Now, the Big Bang was caused. It had a physical cause. What is so mysterious about that? Well, that's not good enough. According to Dr. Howe, we need a supernatural cause. But wait a minute. How does that make any sense? Divine and natural properties, on the theologian's own definitions, not my definition, I'm not interested in defining God, he is, but accordingly, we're talking about a supernatural God that has nothing in common by definition with nature other than this mysterious origin. Okay? But, by rule number 4, they're too different for any sort of causal relation. Now, sometimes some theologians pull out God created the universe from nothing. My debater didn't do it, but you can understand why that similarly only multiplies mysteries, violates the notion of cause itself. Now, we're getting to this business of the fine-tuning argument. I should say one more thing. This Dr. Howe spoke about this business of infinity being impossible. This Kalam cosmological argument suffers from a severe logical fallacy that actually most philosophers understand, and mathematicians and magicians surely understand it. Dr. Howe apparently doesn't. He said that you can't conceive of an infinite, therefore nothing of infinite duration, extent, time, and so forth can exist. The problem is, however, we're dealing with the concept of infinity. It's not an ordinary concept like a train. Your intuitions tell you all kinds of things. If you're successfully conceiving of an infinite, you by definition have failed. The infinite is precisely that which cannot be comprehensively conceived. Okay, that's the mathematical and logical definition of infinity. So for us to be surprised that we fail to be able to conceive of an infinity is in fact a confirmation that what we're talking about is a likely infinity. For all Dr. Howe said, for all we know, all of that possible nature behind and before the Big Bang could in fact just be infinite back in extent, and the human mind can't prove otherwise. So his argument is a failure. It misuses infinity, and any logician and mathematician knows it. Okay? Now, is there a designer? Well, you know the problem. The claim is that the universe's lawful order is highly improbable and that we need a God, right? The thing is, though, we don't need either of these two claims, and my debater can't prove them. First of all, the probability of our universe is unknown. You've seen some calculations thrown around. If he looks to science, science right now cannot make any firm calculations of the probability. In fact, if you think about it, if whatever generated our universe has generated an innumerable or perhaps infinite number of universes, the odds of our universe in fact approaches 1, a guarantee, because it'll generate every possible universe. Furthermore, order may come from simplicity or indeed chaos. My debater has done nothing to prove otherwise. We've heard a lot of hand-waving. He's got a problem with his own God, though, and that's maybe where he's really focused. If a designer God is highly ordered, it would need a creator as well. You can't avoid the regress problem. Think about it. Some theologians, and I think we heard this tonight, you need a maximally ordered God, right? The problem is you can't conceive of it because that violates Rule 1. There's an unjustifiable exception here. How come God gets to be the supremely ordered and complex thing? Maybe nature is, for all we know. Not our limited little universe, but the megaverse, the widerverse. It's a hypothesis, it's a proposal. He can't rule it out, so he can't rule God in. If some theologians go to the maximally simple God, I don't think I heard that from my debater, so I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to skip Revelation because my co-debater did not appeal to Revelation. Last slide. About how many minutes left have I got? Am I coming up on 2-3 minutes? Okay. Look, that's a photograph. Anybody recognize it? That's the Crab Nebula. Now, not only is my partner in debate here giving us no evidence whatsoever that God was involved with biology, again, besides some hand-waving about how much information is. Look, the reality is when it comes to life, the intelligent design scientists, I would call them pseudoscientists, have never shown that anything about life suddenly requires a supernatural creator. This Crab Nebula is about 7,000 light years away. Most of your body was created in either the Big Bang explosion or supernovas like this. Religion ever going to tell you that? Any theologian ever going to tell you that? He makes a big show about relying on science. I don't think Dr. Howe really respects science. He makes it sound like theology somehow figured out the Big Bang. That's baloney. Science offers reasonable and provable knowledge about nature. I say that no one should believe that God made everything, even if I don't know everything myself. My opponent is the one claiming extraordinary knowledge about God beyond the actual capacities of any human being. Don't believe him. Theology has never discovered everything about the natural world around us.
Time.
Thank you.
With a 10-minute rebuttal, Dr. Richard Howe.
Does that take away from my time? I'm going to do it anyway, so I don't have time. I don't need the laptop anymore. So I'm just going to. So talk awkwardly among yourselves while I move my laptop. Thank you, Dr. Shook, for your comments. Let me see if I can just try to address some of his concerns. I'm kind of surprised that he opened with his rebuttal. At least a lot of it. He was rebutting my opening rather than giving his content that I could rebut. So I'm trying to do now my rebuttal of his rebuttal. But anyway, I appreciate it. He accuses me of taking his quotes out of context. I categorically deny that charge. It is possible that I have misunderstood. Perhaps maybe that's what you were suggesting, although I am fairly confident that I did not. You can get all of the slides that you saw on a PDF deck if you go to ses.edu and just follow the links to my faculty webpage. All of the quotes from him and all the others are all footnoted. And the particular quote that he took exception to about supernature is actually from his website, from one of his blog entries. So you can get the URL for that. But I deny the fact that any of these were taken out of context, certainly not deliberately. He calls himself a skeptical atheist or skeptical atheism, and he seems to have perhaps a understandable allergy to the concept of mystery. We throw around these things about, well, you don't want to argue towards mystery. The problem with that as a sort of a catchphrase is sometimes the things to which we have to appeal to make causal explanation may be things that we understand less than the thing we're trying to explain. That, in fact, often is the case. If we got a message from outer space, suppose the SETI program received what they were convinced was not just a natural occurrence, but say a series of prime numbers or something that they were convinced actually came from some intelligence. They may conclude that some intelligence sent us a message. We may not know anything else about that intelligence. Yet we do know it is a sufficient causal explanation of the information that came from outer space, even if we don't know anything about it. So it wouldn't do for somebody to go, well, what else can you tell me about these intelligences? Well, nothing, except they're the causal explanation of the information. Oh, well, then it's not a causal explanation. Well, of course it's a causal explanation. Just because I can't tell you anything more about it than the fact that it is a sufficient condition to explain the effect, that's all you need for a causal explanation. So be careful about being worried about too much mystery. I would submit to you that a lot of things that we do in the cutting edge of quantum physics is quite mysterious. If you read the experiments about wave-particle duality, you want to tell me that's not more mysterious than the beam that was put into the splitter to begin with? Of course it's more mysterious. The fact that it's mysterious is really not what's at stake. It's whether or not the thing that you're positing sufficiently accounts for whatever it is you're trying to explain. Now, what I've tried to do on some occasions is I'm trying to explain some feature of the universe that I think God is a better explanation of. It may minimally end up that the cause is just an intelligence. I'll take that. If somebody says, yeah, I think there must be some intelligence behind the information in the DNA, I'll take that. Because I think that is a step towards theism. Then we can continue the debate later on. Well, what's the nature of this intelligence? And then begin to unpack it. He wants to go according to common sense reasoning. I would submit that the methods that you find among naturalists and physicalists are not adequate to account for some of the very tools that they use in the reasoning process. They don't have any type of understanding of or any type of way to account for the laws of logic, as I mentioned in my presentation, and also things like universals. Why do we think that all human beings possess something in common that makes them all human beings? What is that thing? I would submit that current physicalism just can't account for that in a robust way. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting because there's universals there must be a God. What I'm trying to suggest to you, and I ran out of time. I didn't budget my time as well as I didn't read as fast as I should have apparently. But at any rate, was that I think that these kind of philosophical things, if you will, that have characterized 2,500 years of fertile philosophical discussion are part of a rich tradition that leads to some kind of theism, from Aristotle all the way up. So anyway, that's the significant there. I'm glad that, well, he says I did not use the Bible in my argument, so he wasn't going to bring it up, and then he proceeded to tell us a lot of reasons why he doesn't like the Bible. One thing that did jump out to me, and we're not here to debate the Bible, perhaps we can do that on another occasion, but he seemed to think that it was enough of a reason to reject the Bible because people argue over it. Well, people argue over Obamacare and entitlements and budget cuts. So am I going to just say, you know what, we just need to forget economics and government? Because people argue about it all the time. Well, I can't help it if people disagree with me on some subject. Just because there's disagreement on it is not itself an indicator that the thing about which you're disagreeing is bankrupt. Maybe it is, but that's not the argument for that. So that's just specious. He says you don't need God as a hypothesis. What I would like to do, what the literature does on this subject is it goes into the question of God in terms of the idea of parsimony. That is, you posit God as the explanation of a number of things. The presence of intelligence, the presence of religious experience, which I didn't bring up, but a lot of things. And so the God hypothesis is merely an attempt to be parsimonious, to say, well, rather than positing this is the cause of the information in the DNA, but this is the cause of the fine-tuning, you just posit one kind of thing that has enough explanatory scope and enough explanatory power to account for all of these features. And of course, you can't do that in a 20-minute opening, as we both understand. But we're here to sort of stimulate the conversation and encourage you to go on to further research. He says that I said that the cause of something physical cannot itself be physical. I didn't say that. Of course the cause of something physical can itself be physical. In fact, probably most of the causes of things physical are things physical. So he didn't hear me, and maybe I was stumbling over my words with my dry mouth or whatever. What he misunderstands is the argument was, if we have reason to believe that the entire realm of the physical, that is the universe, came into existence a finite time ago, then it doesn't make any sense to posit the cause of that as itself being a physical thing. Otherwise, it's just part of the original universe in your original equation. Now, if you want to posit potential prior universes and megaverses and stuff, the thing that's frustrating about that is that has just as, if not just as little, if not less, empirical evidence for those hypotheses as anything that I think I've offered as far as the existence of God goes. So it's frustrating sometimes when the theist is called on the carpet if we don't really garner enough scientific evidence to bolster our claims about the DNA or whatever. But then when I say, well, you know, it looks like the universe came into existence a finite time ago. I mean, the universe, everything that we physically perceive. Oh, well, maybe there are these multiverses, or maybe there are these supernatures, or whatever. Well, what's the empirical evidence for that? Well, they don't have any. It's just, but you know what value it serves? Because it serves as a placeholder for the rejection of theism as the possible explanation. That's the only attraction that it has. So I'm not denying that things can do that. He brought up the issue of causality from nothing. I would just submit to you as a sort of therapy that we read some Aristotle. One of my favorite philosophers suggested probably one of the worst things that's happened in the history of Western thought is the degree to which we have departed from the philosophy of Aristotle. Now, I'm not saying you've got to agree with everything Aristotle believes, but I do think that we could be well served by reconsidering the possibility that Aristotle may have been onto something when he had his four causes. And we've pretty much reduced causality to efficient causality. And we're not even used to thinking in these philosophical terms of material cause, formal cause, and final cause. And I suggest to you that that could help us a lot. Last, he said that he thought he made a criticism about the Kalam argument. I did my master's thesis on the Kalam argument at a state university. I'll be glad to show you my bibliography, and you be the judge as to whether or not you think that I'm conversant enough about what people say about this, both for and against. And I didn't say that the past couldn't be infinite because I can't conceive it. Well, obviously I conceived it enough to sit there and make an argument about it, so just like he rightfully pointed out, I'm conceiving it as I'm making an argument. That's not even the argument. And he ought to know that's not the argument if he's familiar with this debate over the Kalam argument, which goes back even before Al-Ghazali, to Al-Kindi, and all the way back to John Philoponus in about the 6th century. The argument is the problems with instantiating an actual infinite into concrete reality. That's the argument. Now, I don't have enough time to develop it here, but maybe we can revisit it in a subsequent rebuttal. So it has nothing to do with its conceivability and all that. Those are just canards and red herrings. Thank you.
A 5-minute rebuttal from John Shook. 10-minute rebuttal.
Wow, double the time. I'll speak more slowly. Dr. Howe complains that I don't like mystery. I told you at the start of it I like mystery. I admitted mystery. I'm glad that there's mystery. It gives science something to explore. Theology doesn't give us anything. It has not proposed a single serious hypothesis in over 400 years that science has had to take seriously or has had to even figure out how to verify it, because its theological accounts are so mysterious and untestable. They're best left to one side, and that's why we enjoy this thing we call modern civilization today. These arguments, like the Kalam argument, has a fine pedigree. Oh, the names he rolled off going back, well, we'll leave it at that. None of them were serious logicians that would pass muster in a graduate level intro to logic course today, nor did their understanding of the infinite. He makes some claims that he understands the infinite. Well, apparently, maybe he does. I doubt it. No logician would say that you can comprehend infinity. He says, well, we can talk about it. Well, yeah, you can use a symbol and you can manipulate it in mathematics. He didn't take that opportunity either. He took no opportunity to expand on his rather mysterious cosmological argument, did he? I saw no expansion, no elaboration. He says that you can't turn it into a physicality. He just claims this. We've heard no argument for it, right? We're still waiting. Why couldn't it be, as far as we know, just endlessly more natures and natures and natures and universes and universes and universes? It isn't even that as wild a hypothesis as, this personal God. By the way, he claims, he keeps calling it an intelligence. We have heard no clear argument that even if something worthy of being called divine or supernatural is out there, which I doubt, he's given us no reason whatsoever to think that it is personal, that it has intelligence, that it is capable of designing. I already pointed out he's given us no evidence to distrust natural evolution and biology. He still hasn't. Okay? So I think we're on pretty solid grounds that disorder can produce order, and it can produce life. At least we've heard no argument otherwise. Now, he says God can be mysterious. There's lots of mysterious things being proposed. And I said, yeah, quantum mechanics can be mysterious to lay people, to scientists. Neither of us on stage are qualified to speak about quantum mechanical things. Let's admit that. But what I can say is that quantum mechanical explanations of causality are at least minimally understandable, so that you can explain how a nuclear reactor can work, how the sun works. Theology would have never told us anything about those things. He still has not provided any explanation of how God's allegedly causal relationship with the universe, something timeless, eternal, so different from nature, could be responsible for causing nature. Now, a lot of you might think, well, it's God, he can do anything. But of course, he can't assume God. He has to prove God. He hasn't done it. Okay? Thanks to Dr. Howe, how God could possibly produce nature is still a mystery. Dr. Howe, he says, that somehow this God could do it. If you're having a hard time explaining how an infinite thing could become a physical process, imagine how hard it is to imagine how an infinite thing could become a spiritual God. Does your mind not boggle that much as well? Mine does. Common sense says we're dealing with two very equally strange ideas here. When you have a balance, when you don't have one clear explanation standing out as reasonable and comprehensible and verifiable, you don't believe anything. You stay a skeptic, and my job here is to explain why the skeptic is more reasonable. I feel I've accomplished that. Let me say one more thing. Dr. Howe here defends the Bible. He compares it to politics. I wish debating the Bible were as innocent as debating over politics. The Bible is way more important because people are willing to live, kill, and die for the Bible. You don't see that too much in politics, at least what I see on the nightly news yet. People do disagree about the Bible. They can't agree on God. That's why they're willing to kill each other about who's got the better Bible. I take the Bible very seriously. If believers took politics about as seriously as they took the Bible, Well, they used to. That's called the medieval ages, where Dr. Aquinas, that is so lovingly and reverently quoted, comes from. I don't think Dr. Aquinas understood anything about these matters. Why can't the universe have a physical cause? On and on and on. It's more comprehensible. Science has been busily exploring it. And we have knowledge about the world that science has provided that theology never will. We're hearing a lot of bluff and bluster about how you have to believe in a God, right? That science somehow must stop short. I would love to hear an explanation about why he is so confident, so certain, that at some point science just must throw up its hands, admit, we're done here, we can't go any farther, you theologians better take the ball from here, we're going to go sit quietly because we've got nothing more to explore. Nope, that's not how science works. Science has trampled over every theological conception that has been ever cooked up in the fertile imagination of the human mind. It's a fertile imagination, and it has given us science. He thinks that God and theology is needed to supplement science. I claim that all of the arguments that we've heard so far have been failures. We've heard mystery after mystery after mystery with no elaboration because he cannot give one. Theology cannot give one. Okay? So that is the reality, and I think our safest skeptical bet is, again, to put trust in actual empirical confirmation and not abstract philosophical arguments claiming to penetrate into mysteries where the human mind is not yet prepared to go. But when it is prepared to go there, you will not find theologians leading the way. Theology didn't figure out the Crab Nebula. Theology will not figure out the Big Bang. And theology will never figure out anything. Thank you very much.
Second rebuttal by Dr. Howe in the amount of 5 minutes.
I just take a sip of water because my doctor told me I wasn't getting enough hydrogen in my diet. All right, we've heard several things come up that I want to see if I can address as quickly as possible. First of all, I'm glad that to be able to make everybody hear a lot of my hand waving. I thought that was pretty cool. I like that line. I'm going to have to use that one. But he criticized the idea of probability. I brought up the idea of probability with respect to various things regarding the fine-tuning of the universe. Dr. Shook, and I found that this to be the case of several of the atheists that I have read, or at least the skeptics that I've read, they misunderstand, I think, what the argument actually is. The argument is not about probability with respect to why do we have the laws of nature that we do versus other laws of nature. I mean, it would be impossible to imagine, well, what would the universe be like physically if it had totally different laws of nature? Well, I think that would be hard to even imagine what it would be like, because even what we imagine would probably just be variations on the laws of nature that we've already experienced. Rather, the argument is about the probability of the values of the laws. That is to say, you can have gravity as a force of nature, but it doesn't necessarily seemingly have to have the value that it does in terms of the physics of the law itself. That is to say, there's nothing about the values of these various things, the electromagnetic weak, the electromagnetic force, or the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, why they have the value that they do as opposed to something else. A lot of these are relatively independent of each other, so they don't have to have the values that they do have. So it just looks suspicious. That's what the argument is. If you just walked into a room that had 1,000 dials and they had to be precisely set just to play the music, and they were, you would be suspicious that that just didn't happen by randomness and that had no design behind it. It just seems to suggest design. So I'm just arguing it suggests design. It suggests that this was done deliberately. So I appeal to God as a hypothesis, at least an intelligence as a hypothesis. He accused me of, he said he doubted that I had any respect for science. Well, I am not a scientist. I do respect science, but I'll tell you this, what I don't respect, and this is not directed to Dr. Shook, so please don't misunderstand me. What I don't respect is very bad philosophy that passes for science. You owe it to yourself as a thinking human being to become conversant in the history of ideas. And don't just assume because the technician down the road can give you air conditioning or cure your malaria, that he's got the key to the insights of the meaning and purposes of life itself. Don't just assume that. I appreciate all the things that science has been able to give us and all the truths that it's been able to discover. I would submit to you it's only been able to do it to the extent that it has because it owes a debt of gratitude to what philosophy has been able to give to what we call science today. And so what I encourage students to do is to revisit classical philosophy and our heritage as Westerners. Now, you may not be a Westerner here, so you can probably excuse yourself from it, and you probably perhaps have a heritage not dissimilar to the one that I'm trying to celebrate here. And I think it has a lot to do. Now, what's the significance? What does it have to do with the existence of God? Because this idea of this God hypothesis just didn't burp out when Hubble confirmed the Big Bang Theory. This is a concept, if you will, hypothesis that goes back to Aristotle. That doesn't make it true, but it also, I think, suggests it's not a trivial thing. We're not just playing some kind of little semantic games here as far as, again, maybe it's false. That's fine if you conclude that it's false. And I'm sure Dr. Shook has concluded that it's false, and what I'm about to say is not directed to him necessarily either. But please don't just assume that this thing is just settled if you haven't even begun to acquaint yourself with the history of this conversation. It's been going on for 2,500 years. So at least have the decency to acquaint yourself with the categories and arguments of those people who have participated on both sides of the argument. I was surprised that he thought that people are not willing to die and kill for politics. Tell that to the victims of Stalin. Go tell that to my father-in-law, whose father defected under Stalin, whose siblings were killed. They didn't do it because of the Bible. That doesn't prove the Bible true. I'm just saying that what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. He also thank you.
Wow, this really turned into confessional. I didn't think it. I was thinking this was a secular event. But while we're in the business of confessing, I earlier confessed I'm not a trained scientist, and we aren't trained scientists. I am a trained philosopher. I will confess it. And he complains about my lack of respect. I have profound respect for the history of philosophy. I also have profound respect for the history of science, and where science is more right than philosophy and always more right than theology, I admit that, okay? The arguments are in my book. The God debates thoroughly and exhaustively go through at a college level. I mean, this is, not an advanced technical treatise, but at a college level, most every argument that you've ever heard, and I give the best case scenario for those arguments for God. Now, I do go on to demolish all of them. That's my job. But that doesn't mean I don't respect them. In fact, on the atheist world, I get a lot of flack for even debating and trying to understand the theological arguments. Well, I'll play both sides. I'll confess. I'm an educator. Now, modern science and logic disprove it. I mean, that's taking my stand. Now, Dr. Howe wants to know, why do we have our laws of nature? Yeah, we seem pretty special, but I'll tell you, looking at that Crab Nebula puts things in perspective. We are not that special. We are certainly not that special that some God would have created this entire universe for us. Furthermore, it turns out that scientists have calculated, and you can go to the work of Victor Stenger and others to corroborate this, the fundamental laws of nature could vary as much as 15, maybe 20% wiggle without forbidding life of some duration in this universe. If our universe is the only one, that's decent luck, but it's not so crazy improbable that you need some God fiddling the dials to make it turn out just right. Furthermore, we might not be the only one, and we've heard no argument otherwise. Is this universe really intelligently designed for life? This universe? The one science went to the trouble of discovering? 99.999999999% of the total volume of the visible universe is utterly inhospitable and violently, terrifyingly, just impossible for life to survive there. Okay? Does that look like a universe designed for life? As Carl Sagan once observed, you look around the universe, it looks like it was designed for sand, if anything. God loves sand. Furthermore, the future in this universe is bleak. It turns out science has discovered that, in fact, the expansion of the universe is accelerating. 10, 15, 20 billion years from now, we won't be able to see the other galaxies. If you were standing where we are here tonight, there won't be a place to stand. The Earth will be gone, of course. Galaxies will eventually get ripped apart 50 billion years from now, 100, 200 billion years from now. The entire universe will be violently expanding at such a rate the molecules won't be held together. Protons will lose their grip of neutrons and electrons. It's called the Big Rip. This is not a universe, I assure you, designed for life, and you need no God to explain it. Cold, hard physics does tell us that we are in what appears to be mostly a cold, dark universe. Fortunately, it is illuminated by science. Thank you very much.
Each presenter will make a 5-minute closing statement, beginning with Dr. Richard Howe.
Thank you, Dr. Shook. I realize I love debates, by the way. That is, I love to be out there. It's a little scary out here, but I love these kinds of events. But realize that, and I think Dr. Shook would agree with me on this. I'm trying to find something that he'll agree with me on, so maybe this will be it. That there are a lot of constraints here, time constraints and the other kinds of rules that govern. So these issues are quite a bit more complex than either debater can make them in just these little sound bites. So I would encourage you to read. I will be uploading a bibliography to that same website that I mentioned earlier there. And it's a bibliography that has materials on both sides. I have to just update it before I upload it. But I would encourage you to get Dr. Shook's book, The God Debates, and read that and acquaint yourself with these kind of things. But let me just give you this caveat. I've already said this once, but I think people are lulled into this false sense of having wrapped their minds sufficiently. You can't do it exhaustively. But people are lulled into this false sense that I have wrapped my mind sufficiently around this question because I read a skeptical website and then a Christian apologetic website, and that's just about it. And I would just encourage you that this is much more serious and complex than those kinds of venues will be able to grasp. And it's part of what you're hopefully experiencing as students. And so all of that is to say, don't walk away and think that the issue is settled without first attending yourself to the rich literature on the subject, primarily from the philosophers. For all of its virtues, I will submit to you without arguments, and this is my closing, is that what passes for science in a lot of quarters today is bad thinking. It's just bad thinking. And I'll maybe try to get into that in a little bit. So let me just read this closing. I'd like to thank everyone here in making this possible. I didn't get the chance to do that. I didn't take the chance to do it at the beginning because of time. So, gentlemen, both sides of this issue, thank you for your hard work, and I hope you appreciate it as fellow students that they're willing to devote the time that they do to helping us explore these issues. This is the time to do it. When you're at a university, you have more resources at your fingertips now than you probably ever will have from this point forward, unless you pay your alumni dues. Then keep those resources. Dr. Shook, thank you for invigorating experience. I appreciate the things that you've had to say. The evidence that you've heard for and against theism tonight, the attention is so often drawn to this issue. This speaks of how profound the question of God's existence has seemed to most humans throughout history. Perhaps this is because many people have sensed that God has a greater claim on their lives than anything else possibly could. Many perhaps find this claim haunting, if not terrifying. Friedrich Nietzsche is reported to have said, quote, "If one were to prove this God of the Christians to us, we should even less be able to believe in Him." Others have testified throughout history that God is their liberator, Savior, and reason for being. Which side do you come down on? Certainly many questions are still to be examined, even if God's existence is proven. Who is this God? Is it the God of the Bible? Is it Yahweh? Is it somebody else? Allah? Brahman? Krishna? Bubba? I'm from Mississippi, so I can get it kind of. What does He want from me? What is he like? Beyond being the transcendent creator and designer of the universe and the grounding of my moral experience. For those who are undecided, I encourage you to continue examining the issue for yourself. The issue of God's existence is bigger than either Dr. Shook or I are able to make it in the debate, so I encourage you to read widely. Ask theists, atheists, and agnostics what readings they recommend to defend their respective points of view. Research the question for yourself and come to your own conclusion. The answer to tonight's question, does God exist? I believe that you will find that the answer to that question is indeed He does. Thank you.
Closing statement from Dr. Shook.
Oh, I'm not going to use much time. I heartily agree with all of the sentiments about the value of an education generally and an education in religion, theology, skepticism, and science. This is a great time for you folks to be able to do this before the press of urgent life really closes in on you folks. Let me again extend my thanks to everyone involved and Dr. Howe. I have nothing further to say, so I yield the rest of my time to the moderator in the hope that people have some questions. I think we would both love to hear some questions, shall we? So let's have at it, please.
We're going to take about 30 minutes for questions. Please frame your question. The presenters will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. Then the opposing voice will have 1 minute to respond to the presenter's answer to the question. So, and we'll end with the opposite presenter from whom we started. So let's start with Dr. Richard Howe, and we'll begin on the right. And try to form your lines quietly and orderly. You know, we have 30 minutes, and I can tell that we've got more than 30 minutes of questioners. So try to get situated. And let's listen. Are we ready, Robert? Both mics hot.
Is it hot?
I'm just going to do this through the question.
All right, let's begin here on my right. Question for Dr. Richard Howe.
Hi, Dr. Howe. My name is Philip Drum. I was wondering, if there is a true God or a true religion, why do all the religions of the world follow the same geographical trends throughout? Thank you.
You mean, why is it that all Muslims live closer together than all Christians?
Yes, if you're born in America, you're most likely a Christian. If you're born in the Middle East, you're most likely a Muslim. The West Bank, so forth. They all follow geographical trends.
Yes. Well, there may be several explanations of that. The fact that people, first of all, the fact that people believe something to be true or false is irrespective of the fact that they're born in a certain place or even at a certain time. So, for example, when someone says, make sure that I'm following the import of the question. People say, well, if you'd have been born in India, for example, you would be Hindu-like, or if you've been born in China. To which I would say, first of all, if I had been born in some places in the world, I would be probably a geocentrist. That is, I would believe that this Earth was the center of the solar system. So, and in fact, if I had been born at certain times, I might have believed other things about the Earth being flat or whatever. So the truth of the matter is irrespective of any of these kind of statistical trends that we may find. That is to say, even if it's true that if I had been born somewhere I believe something different, all that proves is if I had been born somewhere I would have believed something false. Now, the second thing is that people coming to believe things, I don't deny that there are probably other factors that figure into that. For example, the fact that people have certain cultural influences and these kind of things that are part of. So, I mean, I'm not sure why the fact that if a certain religion is true, they wouldn't necessarily follow these cultural trends. The assumption there is that if a certain religion is true, everyone would have had equal access to be able to discover it's true. But that's like saying, if the sun really is the center of our solar system, why is it that most of the people that believe it is all happen to be concentrated largely in Western cultures? I go, well, that has nothing to do with whether the sun is the center of the solar system. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Real quick, my reply is that there's a very common sense answer. Religion is mostly about culture. I mean, very clearly, cultures have geographic extent, and so do religions. And religion, as the social sciences tell us, is deeply intertwined with culture. That's why it's not about real knowledge. Now, yeah, science emerges in one part of the world, happened to emerge in Europe. But that doesn't mean science is only valid, because wherever you do real scientific experiments, you get the same results no matter where you do them all around the world. That's not the same with religion. Wherever people have mystical or magical practices, wherever they create religions, they get different results. Right? Curious, huh? That's because they're not really learning about anything real. Okay, so that's why, you know, religion just stays more or less limited to wherever it happened to culturally be promulgated. Thank you.
Dr. Schiff, if I understand you right, you're a physicalist, is that correct?
Actually, in technical philosophy, physicalists tend to be defined as those who think that all of reality is exhausted by what is discovered by the hard sciences or perhaps even physics itself. On that sharp definition, again, I stand out. I am a non-reductive naturalist. I am not a physicalist. I do not believe that reality is exhausted by those things that happen to be discovered by a single science. I tend to be a bit more pluralistic and interdisciplinary.
So it is possible then that Dr. Howe is correct, that there might be something beyond the physical, i.e. God.
Well, of course, I'm in favor of science discovering reality, and no theological hypothesis has even been taken seriously, much less confirmed in an exceedingly long time, and it's unlikely to be so. So I rest content with the sciences collectively. So, and naturalism would be the term for the worldview that takes the sciences collectively most seriously for knowledge.
So, but does naturalism include anything beyond nature, anything beyond molecules?
Because naturalism takes most seriously what science says and doesn't take seriously at all what theology has said, because there's been no empirical confirmation of these claims, then the result is believe in nature. I mean, in that sense, you folks are all naturalists, right? You all believe in nature, at least, right? The three-dimensional physical world around. If you don't believe in nature, you've got other problems. The skeptical position is simply that it's enough to stop at nature. That there's not enough evidence to think that there's anything supernatural that is completely and utterly unlike nature.
If space, matter, and time had a beginning, as Dr. Howe tried to relate, not through theology, but through science, is it not reasonable to conclude that the cause must be outside of space?
Well, that question has been asked and answered. I've affirmed in the negative that there is no conclusive argument here, that it cannot be ruled out that there might just be an endless chain of physical events going back through the Big Bang into whatever created the Big Bang and whatever created that. That could, for all we know, be endless, and that's all I need on the table. I don't have to prove it. All I need is on the table as a possibility that doesn't violate any of the basic common sense rationality rules. Furthermore, I don't violate the notion of mysterious causes, because every step of the way it's going to be more physical causes. He's got to suddenly interrupt with mysterious physical causes. But because this isn't a debate, we're going to take your question as having been concluded. Is that right? He's had a fair shot?
So, Dr. Howe, 1 minute response.
I had discovered in reading Dr. Shook's material that he seemed to conspicuously, on my part, avoid the word materialist or physicalist as a way of characterizing his own views. I suspect that is because he senses, as a trained philosopher, the bankruptcy of the materialist approach to reality. So the non-reductive naturalist kind of thing, I think is sort of what's the word? What's the charitable word? It gives persons some wiggle room to, on the one hand, think that they can adequately eschew, these theological concerns he has, and at the same time be a materialist for all intents and purposes. I just want to warn you about what I said during my presentation about the selection effect. He keeps using the word science. If he means by science that it is just what I might mean by philosophy, then fine. But I fear that what passes for science today as a Western discipline is going to be inadequate to commit that fallacy.
Question for Dr. Richard Howe.
Hello. My name is Josh. I'm a religious studies student. My question is this. If we were to prove that God does in fact exist, why would we go ahead and assume that any one religion has a monopoly on it, if God is in fact a supernatural being and we ourselves are natural, we are finite?
That's a great question, and that's kind of what I said in my closing, that this is sort of like, even if we settle the question about God's existence, we've really now introduced a whole lot of more interesting questions. Who is this God and such? So I think the way that question has to be approached would include things like, this is what Anthony Flew did, in fact, during the waning years of his life when he converted to theism or deism, if you will, was he dealt with the question to some extent with, now that I think there is a God, is it possible and reasonable to think that this God has communicated to us? And it's from everything I can read and what I've heard him say, he thought the answer to that was no. He did not think that God had actually communicated to the human race. So what Christians like to argue is that God has communicated to the human race through a series of historical events and particular persons, most of whom you would read about in the Bible. The prophets of Israel and climaxing in Jesus Christ, that Christians would believe is God manifesting himself in human form. But of course, that all has to be argued for too, in terms of the issues he's raised about the Bible, for example, its historical reliability and those kind of things, and also interpretive questions. So those are incredibly important. And I would just encourage you to avail yourself to some of the resources that the Ratio Christi people here would suggest to you about how to answer that in favor of the Christians, and then the atheist group can give you the, hey, this is why we think those answers don't follow. So you got a lot of homework.
Of course.
You've got a lot of homework about non-reductive naturalism, which apparently Dr. Howe hasn't done. It's not a covert operation or a problem. It's a respectable philosophical position. I won't appeal to tradition. I'll simply point out that the several sciences themselves endorse it. Really, it's only the physicists that seem upset that they don't really get the cachet of dictating all of reality anymore. At any rate, my books, and I'm here to defend myself, I'm going to take my remaining time to defend someone who is not here to defend themselves. Dr. Howe has brought up the name of Anthony Flew. Flew was taken advantage of in his elderly years when his mind was not at its full powers. This has been conclusively demonstrated in the New York Times article that I can cite for you after the debate if you need it, but it's easily discovered. The book that came out under his name and others was in fact not written by him with any serious intellectual participation. He was taken advantage of by Christians, essentially. I respect the real Anthony Flew, the one who stayed an atheist until his powers gave out.
Time. Question for John Shook.
Hey, Dr. Shook.
Hey, what's up?
Welcome to Greensboro. I think you kicked Hitchens out of the place as my favorite unbeliever now. Up there. And I'm definitely going to read some of your books about naturalism, especially pragmatism and all that.
Great.
So, and my question kind of segues into what you were trying to explain about non-physical reductionists. And I mean, you call yourself a skeptic, that you don't believe in the Bible, but in the history of philosophy, the true skeptic is a little more nefarious, right? I mean, the true skeptic would ask, is there even such a leather-bound book on my nightstand that even exists? Is it even real? So my question to you would be, as a pragmatist, your theory of knowledge, you talk about common sense, and that's what you base your whole argument on. How is that common sense common? How do you answer the skeptic's challenge as a pragmatist? Unfortunately, I think Dr. Howe just simply granted it to you that you could without contesting it in any real way. How would you? Could you?
Sure. There are skeptics and then there are skeptics. You seem to be aware that there are different schools of ancient, classical, contemporary skepticism. I'm in the modern line of scientific skepticism. I'm not a skeptic that has to doubt whether I have a physical body or whether you exist. I rather take the stand of common sense skepticism. That is to say, take very seriously what the common mass of humanity can understand together. By the way, that rules out almost everything religion has ever said, right? Religions notoriously can't agree on any of their claims. The fact that they can't converge, they can call it God, but as soon as you get down to brass tacks and have some, maybe a little bit of interfaith dialogue, they're at each other's throats before you know it. There's no convergence on what this God is like. Science is different because there is convergence in science. It is common sense to trust what is available to common humanity. Anyone can grow up and be a scientist. Well, of course, that's an exaggeration. Lots of people want to do other things with their lives. But nevertheless, science is available in a way that religion is not for convergence on how nature actually works. So, again, I call myself a skeptic in the broad empiricist, modern sense of skepticism, and I'm not a skeptic in any of the ancient schools, or like a Cartesian skeptic that has to worry about it. I don't arbitrarily believe it because you believe it, and you believe it, and you believe it, and you believe it. If there are any true skeptics in the crowd that doubt whether or not they have bodies or whether or not they're currently inhabiting the planet Earth, again, no debate is going to be of service to you. But again, this isn't a debate, so it's time to move on. Please.
Dr. Howe, 1 minute response.
Yeah, I concur with Dr. Shook that about our confidence about physical reality and stuff. I think that's just untenable for people to begin to doubt whether they have their own body and stuff. I mean, I know that erupts on occasion in history, philosophy, Descartes' methodological skepticism and these kind of things, but as a classical realist, I would generally concur that if a person starts delving into that kind of skepticism, it's really hard to even have interaction with them, to even have the debate, but that's another topic. Explaining Anthony Flews was not taken advantage of. That's a canard that's raised by the atheist community because they can't stand that one of their prize atheists repudiated atheism. If you think the book was manipulated by the Christians, then listen to Anthony Flew himself long before he wrote the book. You can hear his interviews. They're on the internet. It's before he wrote his book. And there's nobody there to manipulate him. He's just asked these questions and he tells you what he thinks.
Time. Question for Dr. Richard Howe.
Yes, Dr. Howe, I'm wondering that do you feel that as a believer that you experience a quality in life, whether it be contentment or peace that surpasses all understanding, that a non-believer does not?
I can't know what a non-believer, first of all, feels. So I can only know what they tell me they feel. But I don't feel what they feel. And frankly, the answer to that is probably most of the time no. Most of my life is not characterized by some type of euphoria that I attribute to my Christian faith. I think that I'm probably not unlike most human beings, whether they're believers or not. That I have to contend with the exigencies of life. I sometimes wonder why things happen the way they do and these kind of things. But the thing that drives me is primarily what is true. And how do I know what is true? Irrespective of how I, quote, feel about these things. I mean, I'm all for feeling. But so many things can impinge on us to affect the way that we feel about things. And one of the things that older Christians like to teach younger Christians very early in the Christian life is that you're not going to be able to conduct your Christian life on the basis of your feelings. You're not going to feel like you have eternal life. You're not going to feel a lot of times like there even is a God necessarily, or that He loves you. You don't feel those things a lot. But you have to decide whether you think they're true or not, first of all. And then hopefully what you come to believe is true will begin to sink down in and begin to affect you at these deeper levels.
Well, then if I could rephrase the question then, do you believe that it is true that a Christian experiences a quality in life that a non-Christian does not?
I don't think that that's necessarily true.
Okay.
I think that sometimes if you're asking me a theological question about some type of theological assessment about a person's life, I might eventually, if you qualify the question enough, I might eventually go, oh, well, yeah, I think that.
Right.
But if you're just asking me in terms of just normal human experience, no, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, maybe Christians will disagree with me, but no.
Time.
I don't necessarily think so.
I have nothing to add. Please.
Good evening, Dr. Shook.
Hi.
I'm an international visitor, and
Oh, great.
thank you for your interesting comments. I think we can all agree that science has been very successful. Yet it assumes, and this word has popped up right throughout the debate, the existence of something that has hitherto not been empirically verified, and I would put it, is by definition empirically unverifiable, and and you could make a good case for it that it is even more mysterious than God, and that is the mind. What I would like to know is, do you accept the existence of the mind, or do you go more like the church lens into everything on phenomenology, etc., etc.? And what I would like to further know is, why cannot God have the same ideal existence as the mind does?
Well, first of all, the mind does not have an ideal existence. I told you I was a naturalist. Everything about the mind, including the experience, feelings, emotions, that sore feeling in your tuchus when you've been sitting in one seat too long, that's all physical processes, whether you want to believe it or happen to know it or not. Now, showing that that is the case is very difficult. I can't stand up here in a minute and a half and solve the mind-body problem. However, it is impossible to solve the mind-body problem if you first define the mind in such utterly unnatural terms and then complain that science can't explain it. Instead, what science does is it takes problems apart. Take, for example, your capacity to sense the external world. It turns out you have a nervous system to do that. What do you know? A physical thing, processing light radiation, another physical thing. It rockets around your brain and it becomes available to the rest of your brain. All physical processes. Does it look like a physical process as you glare into the sharp lights? No, but lots of things don't necessarily look like physical processes until you do the hard science of investigating in them. The alleged failure so far of science to, quote, explain how the mind is purely natural, by the way, is still not yet any sort of support or argument for spiritualism or supernaturalism. Just because science hasn't explained something yet doesn't mean that it can never do so, and surely it's premature to insert a God hypothesis which can't even be verified on its own account because it just adds another mystery. It is utterly mysterious how two utterly different things, an alleged spirit or mind, could possibly interact with the body. That problem drove Descartes crazy till his last days.